All right, so Caleb Williams is a 22-year-old Afro-Latino, I think, future All-Pro Super Bowl championship winning quarterback for my Chicago Bears. I always believed it was Caleb Williams. Ignore any tweets you've seen about me maybe being a Justin Fields guy and saying that I was going to cut off my locks if he got traded. Definitely got hacked for that tweet. Definitely got hacked. So Caleb is in the news right now, or was in the news a week ago because I'm late with this shit, because he was at a USC girls basketball game and had a, awkward Gen Z moment where he waved at the crowd and people thought that he had on lip gloss and fingernail polish and noticed that his phone was pink. Now, the only thing that was true about that is the fact that his phone was pink, but Caleb came out after the fact and pointed out that he did not have on fingernail polish or anything else. It was just kind of the weird coloring of the camera that was used.
The wallet white.
The wallet's white.
Phone is pink. Case is clear.
What the fingernails look like?
Nails are clear. Lips are pink. Your girl love them.
However, this is not the first time that people have been trying to question and police Caleb's presentation of his masculinity. And this is kind of interesting because somebody tweeted out a very significant point that Caleb is likely going to be the NFL's first Gen Z superstar. Like, Caleb Williams was born in 2002. Along with that, Caleb is also probably the first true NIL superstar to come out of college football. For those who don't know, NIL stands for name and likeness, which is a fancy or not so fancy way of pointing out that Caleb was able to make some serious money as a college football player. That's something that I think just started in like 2020, whereas the previous 70 years of the NCAA for all college athletes meant that you could not get paid anything really for all the work you put in or all the money you were making for the NCAA or whatever school you were going to. The NIL changed that and meant that at least the bigger stars of college sports could get endorsement deals and do different things with their name and likeness to make sure they got paid. As such, many college football megastars are millionaires before they enter the league. And aside from the fact that that's a much more fair deal for them to actually get paid for their grueling labor, it also means that these leagues have a little less power over them and that they feel a little more inclined to do what they want. And that's kind of what Caleb is doing. I think that's also a Gen Z thing. I think, I don't know if you can put like an old man filter behind me or something. Gen Z is growing up with the foresight or aftersight of the internet, which means they have a relatively strong understanding of the world as young people. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but the product of that is that they kind of don't give a fuck about our institutions and like traditions and things that we tell them they're supposed to do. If they can go and check the history of that thing and say, that thing seems like it sucks, we're not doing it. So that's kind of what Caleb Williams is doing, at least when it comes to his sense of fashion and the way he's presenting to the world. Caleb Williams is, I don't want to call him genderqueer, but he is definitely more progressive or eclectic in his presentation than your average NFL player, especially a quarterback. And for those who don't understand, the quarterback is like the president of the team. He's the front face of a football organization. And for the most part, even the more flamboyant quarterbacks aren't kind of presenting the things that Caleb Williams is presenting to us right now. And thus this moment and previous incidents with Caleb Williams is bringing back the he put on a dress type energy for NFL players, except it's getting out of the black barbershop and it's just on sports Twitter in general. And as you can imagine, it's fucking horrible. I've already talked about the whole he put on the dress, emasculation thing is bullshit. I'll probably have to talk about it again because it's just the dumb idea that keeps on giving. This time in particular, though, it does feel more frustrating aside from the fact that we are talking about my quarterback. But also there's all these white men joining in on the fun, and it just takes on an extra level of ick in that situation. And to me, the most ridiculous part of it is that we've seen this before and we've seen it much more drastically, yet people still, are pulling this culture wars nonsense around what happened to real men and what's happening to the youth, etc., when literally this was a thing. This is Ricky Williams along with his, at the time, future football coach, Mike Ditka, legendary Chicago football coach, I might add. Way back in 1999. Now, the story behind this is that Mike Ditka, being kind of a maverick type of guy himself, was letting it be known that he was going to draft Ricky Williams. He was willing to trade away all of his draft picks to make it happen, which is something like you shouldn't ever do, and you definitely shouldn't tell people that you plan to do that. So that's a whole other football conversation. But to like commemorate this unique moment in football history, this was their idea, this marriage of Ricky Williams and his future coach. And like, you can make some critiques of how this does look from a racial standpoint, considering the history of black men and how, while the he put on a dress narrative is some nonsense, the effeminization and demasculation of black men historically from slavery is a thing that did exist. So if you want to critique it through that lens, I get it. But that's not what people did. People just said, that nigga gay. That's what they did. And that's what they continue to do. That nigga gay is the height of some people's criticism when it comes to gender and masculinity. It is what it is. All that said, Ricky Williams, all 5'10", 240 pounds of him, went on to have an all-time great NFL career as a running back, went on to stay out the spotlight for the most part, married a woman, had a bunch of kids, smoked a lot of weed from what I understand. It was really not a big deal. A bigger deal maybe you can make, going back to Chicago again, we are really at the center of a lot of this shit. That's interesting. Is Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman, 3 years before this, of his own volition, went to a book signing in a complete wedding dress along with makeup. This was at the height of his popularity, at the height of the Bulls' popularity, and this really wasn't the first time that he had done this type of gender-bending, queer-coded activity. That was part of his gimmick. And while this is somewhat unique with these athletes because their large black male bodies give more credence to certain ideas about the realities of black masculinity and the image of the big black brute, it still is part of a tradition that black men have been participating in for generations now. The reality is that black men who have the power and capacity to escape the normative expectations of what black masculinity is supposed to be have kind of always done that, especially if they're celebrity status, especially if they're superstars, especially if it's something that gets them paid. And I don't understand why the relatively minor transgressions of Caleb Williams are bringing him this same negative attention, aside from the fact that I feel like people are more stupid now because of social media. Like, you can go all the way back to James Brown, Ronald Isley, Prince. Today you have Lakeith Stanfield, Young Thug, and so on. Part of it is purely for attention. Part of it is self-expression. But the point is that this idea that black men can't present in this way and be straight and masculine doesn't have any basis in reality. We've understood this on numerous occasions throughout history, yet every time a new version of it pops up, some really dumb person starts tweeting or talking about it in a barbershop. And that's where we are right now. And I really want to drive that point home, that this was all just about presentation, because all these men were pretty traditionally masculine outside of their presentation of dress. Ironically, Prince, later in his life, was low-key homophobic. He was the most queer-coded homophobe that history has ever given us. If you watched Ricky Williams or Dennis Rodman play their respective sports, then you had no question about the level of intensity and aggression and any other masculine-coded emotion or trait that you might think of was definitely present for them on the court and the field. And I'm not saying this to imply that it would be bad if it wasn't. It would be bad for them because they're athletes. But just the way that we are so inclined to strip certain positive traits from men who don't present in a traditionally masculine way, it does not make sense. And it doesn't make sense furthermore because we've seen it so many times and we tend to forget that it exists as soon as these men present in some other way. Like right now, half of the hip hop culture world is rooting for Young Thug to beat this weird RICO case happening here in Atlanta. And I was there 10 years ago when Young Thug was wearing a dress, and the same old heads that are mad about him being arrested now were calling him the gay antichrist of hip hop and saying hip hop is dead. And in between that, we're jamming to all of the dope songs that he made. It really, really doesn't make any sense. And it's frustrating because this is not a complex analysis I'm bringing to y'all right now. This is as simple as, nigga, do you pay attention? Nigga, do you remember what happened historically? That's it. I did not use any degrees to notice this same play happening over and over again. I just have a memory and the ability to not get locked into the same ideological bot framework that a lot of dudes sadly are locked into. And that's the thing I really want to point out, is that it's be the same type of dudes that call themselves free thinkers that will pull out the same argument over and over again, no matter how obvious that this is not a free thinker argument. Because when people attack dudes like Caleb Williams or historically Dennis Rodman or Young Thug, it's never actually about them. It's never actually about the target of this quasi-homophobic or at least derisive energy toward these black men in the public eye. It's always about the individual, and I'm gonna be honest, insecure men that feel the need to police other men as a way to prop up their own fragile masculinity. That's just keeping it a buck with y'all. Going into my sociology bag for a second, there is a phenomenon where younger men or men less secure in their masculinity feel the need to attack other men or challenge other men's sexuality or sexual identity as a way of affirming their own. And that's some weak shit, just to keep it real. It's not just weak-minded, it's weak of spirit, and it's, childish. Like, this is where pause and no homo come from. And although I know there is comedic utility in pause and no homo, if you're doing it past like the age of 20, what are you really doing? What are you really doing? You shouldn't be doing it at all, but just like, at least as younger men, younger boys who are involved in that volatile reality of trying to figure out what masculinity is, I can make sense of it. As you get older, it's just unfiltered homophobia. But the idea of being nice to gay people is so far from certain folks' perspective on how the world should work that we are now showing videos of 22-year-olds with pink phones who are about to be multi-millionaires playing the most aggressive masculine sport in America and having the nerve to question their masculinity on your little keyboards with your thumbs. I don't know how else to speak to this nonsense. Leave my quarterback alone. To some of you, talking about Caleb Williams or football in general may seem a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but to those who watch the channel regularly, you know that talking about sports and masculinity is actually something I've done since my time starting here on YouTube. Whether it be videos about Mike Tyson, the pitfalls of being a professional black athlete, or analyzing what's going on with Deion Sanders and his unique coaching career, I've always touched on these topics, but I do so sparingly, partly because anytime you talk about the NFL, college football, and especially professional wrestling, you get a ton of flack from copyright bots and corporations on what you can and cannot show under free use. So if you've seen some of those videos, you've probably also seen them with big ugly boxes in the middle of them that's blocking out some of the content. And that's because that's what I had to do to get those videos up on YouTube. As much as I love this job, the truth is that YouTube does not support creators when it comes to fair use laws. The same thing happens with music, movie clips. Even cursing a bit too much can cause me not to get paid for my videos. And this is why I'm so happy to be a part of today's sponsor, Nebula. Nebula was created by folks like myself who want a space apart from YouTube where we can create without worrying too much about the challenges that come with posting videos on YouTube. Things that most people don't know about that I just mentioned. At Nebula, we get to take more chances by making things that might not be feasible here on YouTube. This might be a short documentary on extremely vulgar or violent music from Volksgeist, or a video about the history of sex scenes from Maggie Mae Fish, or a video on the mystery of what actually broke up the Beatles by Lindsay Ellis, who's no longer making content on YouTube and is exclusively on Nebula. It also means finding those aforementioned videos from me uncut without ad breaks or sponsorees like the one you're listening to right now. And this is because Nebula is not a part of the big tech machine, independently owned and controlled by creators like myself who need your direct support to keep this machine going. So if you want access to Nebula and you want to support creators like me, please click the link in the description and use my promo code SignifiedBsides to get 40% off a year subscription. That's only $2.50 a month. You get access to countless hours of content, including a ton of original content you can't see anywhere else. All your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you to Nebula for sponsoring this video. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Light Work.